Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for hanging in. I want to also thank Michael Thomas, the president of NEBI, and Carolyn Morwick for convening the panel, for bringing us all together today around a really important subject. My name is Fred Clark. I'm the president of Bridgewater State University. And I want to also thank all the Bridgewater people for hanging in. That was good. They were guaranteeing me an audience. I was wondering if we'd have one. I'm going to have some opening comments, but I thought first I would introduce our panelists, and then after I have some opening comments, we'll go right down the line. You can let folks know what you've been engaged with, what you're working on. So first we have Maria Flynn, who's a Senior Vice President, Director of Building Economic Opportunity Group at JFF, which we all know is Jobs for the Future. Thank you, Maria, for being here. Richard Porter, former Vice President of Cooperative Education at Northeastern University. Richard, good to see you. We have Marjorie Cohen, Senior Policy Analyst, Education Division, National Governors Association Center for Best Practices. It's terrific. And finally, Maureen Dumas, Vice President for Experiential Learning and Career Services at Johnson & Wales. We had a great conversation on the phone a week or two ago, and I know they're going to be terrific today. Let me just give you a couple opening comments, and I'm not sure if I was selected for this purpose, but we have had a focus at Bridgewater State University on internships in particular. I've just finished my first year as president, but before I became president, I was the vice president for external affairs at Bridgewater State. And I think the timing of this conference is absolutely perfect. And I know this is true in all of New England, it's particularly true here in Massachusetts, but we have a really significant demographic decline in K-12. We have so many fewer students in K-12. We have about 9% less people graduating high school than we did just a couple of years ago. And that will continue all the way out, at least from what I've been told, all the way out to 2030. And if you take that implosion of the number of folks in K-12 and couple that with the number of people that are retiring every single day in the baby boom generation, you can see very quickly that we have an imbalance. And in Massachusetts, by 2020, we will have anywhere from 40 to 60,000 less people in the workforce with college degrees. 40 to 60,000. I think the competition for our students is going to get very, very intense, and I've already seen the beginning evidence of it. So as Vice President for External Affairs, I personally knocked on about 100 employer doors with many of my Bridgewater colleagues in the room. And I asked them, what are you looking for in your employees? And what they said, and we just heard it in the previous panel, we want them to be adaptable. The number one issue, adaptable. We want them to be critical thinkers. We want them to be problem solvers. We want them to use different frames to look at a problem and to find a solution. We want them to write and speak effectively. We want them to be able to work with others, especially in teams. We want them also to be culturally competent. Now, they had some other things to say, but I just want to remind everybody that that is the very definition of a liberal arts education. And we value that at Bridgewater State very much. And I do think it helps our students to be adaptable. We heard earlier that you can expect to have 10 to 14 jobs in your career if you're graduating from one of our institutions. Well, I was introduced by our previous provost about a year ago, and he went through my previous 8 jobs, and I thought I was doing pretty well in my progression until he said, I guess Fred just can't hold down a job. So, but our students really will have to be adaptable going forward. So we took a look at liberal arts, but also obviously a high quality major, the skills that you acquire there, and then some kind of experiential education, particularly through internships. We thought all of those things were important. But when we looked at our internship infrastructure at Bridgewater, we had a part-time person working for John Paganelli in Career Services. John asked the best questions. I heard that, by the way, today. And we did not have a separate effort really for internships. We had 1,000 internship opportunities in our database, but only 200 were getting taken advantage of, and in total, only 12 were paid. And what we realized is that with half of our students being low income or first in their family, or students of color or some combination, students couldn't afford to do an internship. They couldn't come to Boston or go to New Bedford or go to Providence. They couldn't afford the gas, the train fare, the parking, whatever it might be. So they stayed in the jobs that paid them, whether it was the 99 restaurant or bagging groceries or something like that. That's why only 20% got taken advantage of. And we had a really loose inventory. Faculty owned internships and they kept them from the administrators because there's really no need for them to connect with us. So we looked at all that and we said we need to make an investment. So we created a full-time internship office. It works very closely with career services and external affairs as well. We did an inventory of internships, and that was important, credit or non-credit. And then here's the most important piece. We worked hard to create paid internships. Paid internships. Now here's the public policy component. The state of Massachusetts, I won't say they did it intentionally, but they've done it consistently anyway. They've given us, through the state universities, $1 million to incentivize the raising of private funds to match against paid internships. $1 million a year, we divide it amongst the 9 state universities, and at Bridgewater State, we've been able to leverage what we've gotten over the last 3 years to create $1.6 million in paid internships. This year, we had 400 paid internships for our students, up from 12 3 years ago. That is making a huge difference for our students, and the number of internships that are actually being taken advantage of overall has increased rapidly at Bridgewater State. The employers are desperate, and I really mean desperate. The ones I've met, they want to have a partnership to create a talent pipeline because they're all worried about that talent pipeline from Cisco to Johnson & Johnson to 80 Makepeace. But as we've done all that work, we're also taking a look at the data. Who is taking advantage of internships or experiential education? Are they the students that are most able to afford it? Do they look like our typical students on campus? Are they residents? Are they commuters? Are they low income, high income, whatever that might be? So we are looking very carefully to make sure that the disbursement of our internships matches our student profile as well, and it generally does. But it is not cutting across all of our majors at this point in time. We've also found out some other things. A quarter of our internships are in gateway cities. That's great. So where are those internships occurring? Are we helping to serve the region that we are located in as well? And lastly, one other piece that we've learned, some of our students, and I think this was discussed earlier, get their information from parents. If you're first generation, your parents may not be able to give you the best information about a career. So our students really need that kind of one-to-one guidance. Sometimes they might even need, and we have a closet for it, so to speak, how to dress for success. We have clothes for our students if they need a jacket or a dress, or they need a pair of shoes to really look the part as well. So you really have to pay attention holistically, I think, to students, and that's what we're doing at Bridgewater State. So we have a really great panel. I've already introduced them, and I think what I'd like to do, Maria, starting with you, is just have you tell the group here what have you been focused on so far in your recent work.
Hi, everybody. So as Fred said, I'm Maria Flynn. I'm with Jobs for the Future. We're a national nonprofit organization that does education and workforce development reform work across the country. Our office is right down the street here, but we also have offices in Washington, D.C. and the Bay Area. And work-based learning is really one of our main areas of focus right now. And in some ways, it has been throughout the 30 years that JFF has been around. We really got our start back in the 90s around school to work and that initiative that was back in the Clinton administration. And so really looking at work and work-based learning as a critical part of an education pathway has always been something that we think is critically important. One angle that we take, similar to what Fred just said, is we are interested in this from an equity perspective. Our goal in our organization is to really help all underprepared young people and adults attain a post-secondary credential and move on to a good paying job. So we want to be sure that all students starting in high school have access to quality paid work-based learning opportunities. So one thing that we published a few months ago is a brief on work-based learning. One thing we've noticed is that the term gets used a lot in a lot of different ways, particularly if you're in a K-12 audience or here in a post-secondary audience or if you're in kind of a workforce development audience. So we put together a a publication, and back in the far corner I have some copies of this one pager that outlines the 7 principles of work-based learning that we outline in that publication. And we took kind of the perspective of 7 principles that would apply whether you're talking about a high school program, a community college program, a 4-year program, or so on. So hopefully that will be helpful to you. We're also really interested in how to scale work-based learning. So I think some of the conversations today about whole institutions looking at this, the numbers like Fred just mentioned at Bridgewater, we're looking at the possibility of looking at regional work-based learning systems. This is some work that we're doing out in California with the Irvine Foundation. Is it possible to develop a regional system of work-based learning so that employers are not being tapped by 20 different entities, that there's actually a cohesive system that could be looking at experiences for 10th graders all the way up through university students, that's kind of really in line with the workforce demands of a regional labor market. And then finally, I think we're going to come back to policy later, but we're also working with a number of groups in DC around some recommendations to Congress around the federal work study program and how that could be reformed, both to have a bit more of an equity lens to the program, but also ensuring that those opportunities are better aligned with a student's major program of study.
Richard? Thank you. That sounds like exciting work. So my name is Richard Porter. As Fred mentioned, I'm a former Vice President for Cooperative Education at Northeastern University. Most recently, for the last 12 years, I've been working with WASTE as a program director for planning institutes for high-impact experiential education. So what that means is that I and my colleagues have been working with people in this region, throughout the country, internationally, helping them do the sort of thing that Fred is doing. How do you go from where you are, wherever that may be, and in some cases we don't have any experiential education at all, or we have some, but it's very diverse. It's not bringing to the institution the kind of impact for our students that we'd like. So how do we work together to do better? So we've been doing that for 12 years now. It's really exciting. And some of the things that I see emerging are, looking into the future, is liberal arts. Oh, by the way, I should say I'm also a math professor at Northeastern. So when I say liberal arts with a little bit of passion, it's not coming because I'm trained in liberal arts. It's coming from the fact that it's absolutely essential and it's critical. And traditionally in experiential education, if you think of co-op and internships, you think of, well, that's great for engineering. Yes, it is. That's great for students in business. Yes, it is. How about English, philosophy, history? We have to deliver for those students. And as Fred was saying, they're looking for those students. But we're not doing anything. We're certainly not doing enough. And so I see that is one critical issue, changing the perception of experiential education so it's inclusive. It's for everybody. There's value there. There's value for the student. There's value for the institution. There's value for the employer. Just untapped. Quality. You have to deliver quality programs. Because, again, as was mentioned earlier, the pipeline is shrinking. Do we want to survive? I want to survive. So we have to offer quality. We can't just say from the school perspective, for people who are thinking about coming to our schools, we offer internships. Everybody's going to say that. What you need is students who are having absolutely fantastic experiences, and they will help you fill your classes. You need employers who are having absolutely outstanding experiences with your students, and that requires some work on your part before they go there, if you're from the school perspective. If you're from the employer perspective, you want students who are going to come in and make a difference and contribute to your workplace. How do you do that? How do you manage that so you get the real impact? So these are the kinds of issues that we talk about in the WACE Institutes, and I love it.
Thank you, Richard. Marjorie.
Okay, so I'm going to take a pretty broad view. I work at an organization called the National Governors Association in Washington, D.C., because that's where we are, as one would think. So there are two sides of the National Governors Association. There is the lobbying, the federal government, meeting planning, and sort of that side of and that's a 501c4. On the other hand, there is the Center for Best Practices, which is where I sit, which is a 501c3. And we are grant funded, and we work very closely with states, with governors, with their senior staff, agency staff, to really help them move the needle on whatever it is that they're hoping to do. And I say that just so that you have a sense of this. Interestingly, from the 90s, if you remember, a lot of governors wanted to be the education governor. In the 2000s, we are hearing a lot more about being the jobs governor, except we've always believed that being the jobs governor means being an education governor. So in 2014, Governor Mary Fallin from Oklahoma became our chair, and every chair has an initiative, and her initiative was called America Works. And through that, we really started to help states, and actually internally as well, connect education and workforce and training to the needs of a state's economy. And that ended up being a very big job. There are, whole agencies that don't talk to each other. There are whole parts of agencies that don't talk to each other. So it was really about getting the K-12 chief, and if there was a state higher ed officer, and there is not in every state, and then if there isn't, then the community colleges and the universities and workforce development or labor, and really getting everybody into a room and saying, how do we all pull in the same direction? How do we understand what we want our economic development to look like? And how do we help get ourselves there? How do we grow our own? How do we take the folks that are already here and really prepare them for the kind of workforce that we're hoping to have? And so from America Works came a 2-year technical assistance project called the Talent Pipeline Policy Academy. And its job was really around connecting education and workforce to the state's economic needs. And we had 13 states that were doing this. And they are, the 2-year project is about over. We have a continuation grant. We're going to help a few more states dig a little bit deeper. And we really looked at the components of making this partnership and collaboration actually work. And we pulled from actually collective impact to really help them understand. So each state really thought about a vision, whether that's an attainment goal or even just a general sense of we want to make sure that we can fill all of the jobs that are coming in. There was a real effort to connect data systems and to have data-driven decision-making on the state level. There was a real focus on partnerships, particularly high-quality employer-led partnerships. And then the fourth piece was really realigning resources and incentives. I have a colleague who always says that the way that you can tell a state's priorities is to look at their budget. So in doing all of that, we've worked very closely with these 13 states, really putting people in a room that have never been in a room together and really getting them to speak the same language. In the process, we have also developed another policy academy specifically on work-based learning. And this is really for a lot of our states an outgrowth of the talent pipeline. We are working with 6 states on really understanding, identifying, and scaling work-based learning. Most states do not have any sense of the work-based learning programs going on in their state, whether it's K-12, higher ed, workforce, and we really want to talk about high quality. And in doing so, we talk to our states about identifying the high quality programs and then figuring out how to scale, how to actually make this something that every student in ages 16 through 29 can participate in. And I just want to throw out the idea that one of the things we have not really talked about this today has been what is considered the gold standard of work-based learning, which is registered apprenticeship. And that is not much like we were just talking about. That is not just construction and traditional trades. That registered apprenticeship can be in almost any industry and gives the work and learn piece all at the same time. And that's something that we're really working with our states to understand.
Thank you, Marjorie. Maureen.
Thank you, Marjorie. I think, as Marjorie said, you can tell the importance for a state by their funding. You can also tell the importance for a higher education institution, what their funding is for career services and the emphasis they put into that. I think it works both ways. And for a state to have a great relationship with their higher education partners, there needs to be an infrastructure at those partners to be able to work with the state on the initiatives that are happening. To give you a little background of Johnson & Wales, I'm very fortunate. I'm fairly new to my role. I'm about 5 years into it. And before I came into this role, my area, Experiential Education and Career Services, reported to Student Services. So we went through a real transformation. I am an academic unit now. I have a seat at the table. For those of you who were here for that last presentation, I have a voice and I can really influence the direction that the university is going in. And for us, part of our mission is to provide our students with an authentic learning experience. So for every one of our students, they have to have that experience. And we define it as an experience that is faculty-driven, that is for credit, and that is with a partner. Whether it's a nonprofit or industry partner, they have that opportunity to do that. And the greatest way that we do that is through internship. And we have 4,000 students who intern every year. They're in 50 states and they're in 23 different countries. So you can imagine with the size of the number of students that we have interning, it reflects the size of my department and the budget that we have. We are very centralized in what we do, which was a big change that we made when I came into this area. One of the things that I really wanted to talk about, because I think it's been a theme that I've heard throughout all the presentation, is how do we get our students to be able to articulate what they're learning? How are we transferring those soft skills? I'll use that bad word that they said the last presentation if you were there. And, for us, we did that. We made a lot of changes to our industry project. In the past, the industry project was very much focused on that industry partner. What could the student do for them in that one term that they were there? And we changed it so that project was on the student. So again, simple things such as goal setting. What do you want to get out of this experience? And it's faculty driven. So there are prompts throughout that term to say, are you meeting your goals? Are you doing what you thought you were going to do in this experience? And we define it by what we think the outcomes should be for that experience. We define experiential education outcomes, which goes across every single major. So we're asking students, did you have the opportunity to, public speak while you were there? Conflict resolution, adaptability, so that we're forcing the students to use the terms that employers recognize and transferring it into their internship experience. So hopefully by the end of that experience, they've written about it, they've talked to their faculty advisor about it, and they've talked to their employer partner, so that they're taking something from that experience, not just about resume building. They're using what we want them to learn about, which is the outcomes of that experience. Lastly, in terms of Johnson & Wales, we were finding a little similar to Bridgewater State in that our students a lot of them are first generation, and many of our students were choosing not to do internship for socioeconomic reasons. It is expensive. Most of our students work, so they have to leave that job that they're getting paid for to do an internship. And so we decided to provide all of our students with a stipend. So if they are doing an internship in an unpaid setting, whether it's a nonprofit, they're eligible for a stipend up to $3,000. And how I was able to do that is through data. When I came into the area, there wasn't a lot of information in terms of where were our students, what were the struggles that they were having. And I actually had come from being the Dean of Admissions, which was an area that was very data-driven. I knew everything at the end of the day. Really didn't know anything when I came into this area. So collected the data and found that there was real gaps in who we were serving and how we were helping our students. So using that information to be able to talk to the trustees, talk to our president, our chancellor, to say, we're not serving every student. There's opportunity here. And when you look at working with agencies, they value all of our students, and we have to make sure that all of our students get this exposure and get this type of experience. Lastly, I just want to end with our state. We have a new governor, Gina Raimondo, who has done tremendous things to connect higher education to industry. Our university serves on the Governor's Workforce Board, and we have several initiatives that are going on right now. One of them that's focused on technology and starting that K through 12, but also continuing on into the higher education institutions. How can we take the current majors that we currently have right now and maybe package them in a way where it's a certificate that perhaps a marketing major will have the opportunity to do it, or an advertising major. So it's not just the traditional technology students getting these skills. In addition to that, we also have a program called the College and University Research Collaborative, which is a collaboration of all of the 11 colleges, and they're given topics that are struggles for the state. And they actually do a research-driven project that's a faculty member with students, and they'll answer questions that policymakers perhaps have in that state, and it's data-driven. And it gives our students an opportunity to actually work in a real-world setting, so it meets our needs, but it also meets the needs for the state. So, and there's a few more that I can talk about later.
Great. Thank you very much, Maureen. So we're here to talk about public policy strategies to expand those work-integrated learning opportunities, particularly for students. And I'm wondering what your thoughts might be, other than I mentioned an appropriation to the state universities. That's one lever. But what other strategies could either a municipal, state, or the federal government deploy to help us in this role expand those opportunities? And we'll just, anyone that wants to jump in. Marjorie, you might be a good first one to talk.
Well, so it's a combination of things. It could be, making sure, what. Let me back up for a second. What we have asked our states to do that are both in the Talent Pipeline Policy Academy and in the Work-Based Learning Policy Academy is to do some asset mapping. And that is for them to lay out every possible funding stream, first federal, that could in some way go towards work-based learning. I mean, there's the big ones where it's WIOA, where it's Perkins, where it's HEA. In DC, we only speak in acronyms. So we have them do some really broad thinking, and then adding in the state funding streams, and really start to see where are you duplicating and where are your gaps. We're not getting any more money on much of our budgets. We're not raising a lot more money. So it's time to really talk about the effectiveness and the efficiency of the money that we have. And that's really a big piece of this, is to sit down with the agency heads and really talk about what where is this money coming from? Where is it going? Is it actually being used in a useful way? Do we have, 3 different funding streams that are somehow geared towards the same, pot of people? And then there's this whole rural area that isn't getting served. How do we rethink that? So it's really about understanding the landscape, the funding landscape, and then very intentionally and strategically realigning those resources with the kinds of incentives that you want to create to get where you need to go.
I think also, in addition to the gaps that Marjorie just talked about, it's also determining what are your needs, where are your problems. And so one of the initiatives that we did in the state of Rhode Island, it's called a Bridge Program, and there was a symposium that occurred I think it was in 2012, that local higher education administrators and industry partners got together and found that majority of our students were leaving our state after they graduated. And so how do that brain drain that some of us struggle with, how do we retain these students and keep them in the state? And from the research that they did, they found that if they did an internship in the state and they became engaged in that internship, they actually had a higher percentage of staying. And so with the Bridge Program, the government actually in the state of Rhode Island provides a supplement to employers, an incentive for them. They'll match that salary that they're paying that student so that they'll have more of an incentive to host interns. So I think it's not just about budget, but it's also identifying where are your needs and where you can best put your effort into it.
So I'd like to add to what you're saying. So one thing to keep in mind is what's the goal, and Maureen articulated a goal for Rhode Island. And guess what? Ohio has the same goal, that they want students who are doing their schooling in Ohio, and they don't want them to leave. They'd like them to, after they graduate, continue to live and contribute to the economy. And so they do something very similar to what Maureen was talking about, or Maureen. So there's funding from the state to incentivize this kind of activity. And one thing that I think is really important in the Ohio model, you can Google it, it's Ohio internships, and you'll find lots of good information about the program, is that it's a collaboration of higher education institutions and employers working together, because you need a couple of things. You need students who are well prepared to go out into the workplace and make a contribution, and employers ready to accept them and to take the best possible advantage of the opportunity that presents. So I would say that in thinking about this in other contexts, Thailand has, just to mention something outside the United States, has a similar kind of program, that it's the collaboration, people looking at data. I should say data is really important here for assessment, to help people understand is what you're doing working, how can we make it better, both at the individual learner level, at the program level, and then if you have a state who's investing its valuable resources in this particular direction for a goal, are you meeting that goal? Are you having the impact that you want to have? You need to answer that.
Yeah, I would just build quickly on what Marjorie was saying about some of the federal funding streams. So I think I would really encourage folks to look at the WIOA funds, Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funds, both kind of at the state level and with your regional workforce boards. There's a bigger emphasis in this statute than in its predecessor, WIA, around on-the-job training and work-based learning, both for young people and adults. TANF is also another source that could be looked at, particularly to fund job experience for TANF eligible participants. And then probably never know what's going to happen in Congress, but, a Perkins reauthorization and HEA reauthorization are likely to be, two of the things that move early in the next Congress, and it's expected that work-based learning is going to be a key theme in those as well. So I think it's something that has a lot of traction right now at the federal level, so it's a good time to take advantage of it.
Thank you for your answers. I just from a public perspective, certainly the funding piece, financial aid is another lever, perhaps accountability as well. In my experience, I've also found that the role of government in just being a convener to talk about the needs of business and industry and bringing higher ed, public or private, to the table is very valuable as well. Sometimes we're asked to do something really without the data and without the convening, without the right people in the room. So I would add that as well. But if we were to, in Massachusetts, say to our governor, Charlie Baker, Governor Baker, you really should look at this one state, this particular state, which is a best practice. And we've heard a few states mentioned. We talked about the academy, there's 16 states in there. Is there a state out there, maybe it's Ohio, one state that you would all recommend? And by the way, is there one in New England?
I would actually second Richard's Ohio example. I think for the internship program, I think it's $50 million they've appropriated for that. And I know some of the community colleges like Lorain County have recently announced that they're going to embed work-based learning in every single program of study across the whole college.
And I would say that Tennessee is really out in front around the K-12 piece of work-based learning, and are really thinking about how to make that transition from a career and technical education sort of idea through to career pathways in higher ed. I think that for too long we've really seen these pieces being dealt with as in their own silos. And we really do need to start thinking about this entire pipeline. So I would say Tennessee, and I would say for New England states, New Hampshire happens to be one of the states that we are working with in the Work-Based Learning Policy Academy. And for those of you who were in the panel earlier, one of the panels from earlier this afternoon, Ross Gattell, who is the head of the community colleges of New Hampshire, has really been able to talk and put together some really impressive career pathways and think about work-based learning along with his counterpart in the New Hampshire DOE, Paul Leather. They've both been really working to push the idea of infrastructure and scaling work-based learning.
Ohio, Tennessee, New Hampshire.
And I would just add, I think Ohio had great success because of Nancy Zimmerman, and she is now in New York.
Yeah.
And I think she's probably going to, if she can, do the same thing in New York. And she's already started that work, and I think New York will be at the forefront as well.
I want to ask you, and this is something I worry about as a president, and I certainly worried about it when I knocked on those employer doors. Do you have strategies that you could share with a group for how to engage an employer in the first place? And then how to make sure that that engagement is sustainable going forward? I live in fear that we're going to knock on the door of Johnson & Johnson, have a great couple of meetings, have an internship or two, and then no one tends to the relationship. There's no relationship manager. That's something that keeps me up at night. Do you have any strategies for the group about that?
Yes. Well, I'll go first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
This is a lot of work. There is no magic bullet, except that I think communication is absolutely key. Probably the most important criterion is the students. So if you're setting up a relationship with an employer, you want to make sure that there's a good match between what the employer is looking for or needs and what your students can deliver. You need to make sure they're well prepared in everything you can think of. That they, for example, they walk in the door and they're ready to go. They say, I'm here. I'm ready to make a contribution. Tell me how I can help. They're not there to sit back and just take a look. So what employers react to is students who do that. Now they also need our help to make sure that they understand how they can get that kind of return on the investment that they put into having students in their workplace. So, and that's not always easy, especially if you don't have ongoing programs. You need to work with the employers to help them understand how they can get the most out of that. And then when that works, then you keep it going, right? But if the student experience isn't working out for the employer, it's not going to be helpful.
I know Marjorie and Maureen are fighting over the microphone.
We're not fighting.
We're sharing.
So I would sort of flip that. What you were just talking about is definitely the micro, the student level.
Yeah.
I would also consider sector strategies. So it's not about going employer to employer to employer. It is about bringing an industry together, having them. It's not easy. I'm not going to make this. I'm going to make it sound like it's, you just bring them together and you get them to agree on stuff, and that doesn't happen quite like that. But when you have an entire industry that can come together and can put aside sort of their competitiveness and really agree upon, say, a set of skills that everybody who enters their industry needs to be able to have, and can talk about internships and pre-apprenticeships and registered apprenticeships, and can sort of make those basic designations. You no longer have to go door to door, and you no longer have to really worry year to year, because there would be employers coming in and out. But you've got an industry, usually something that maybe already has an industry association on a state level or even a regional level. I think that's, you want to do this on a strategic and sort of more macro level.
I'll speak it from the higher education perspective. I think it is strategic, and I do think it's on the macro level. I think there has to be a full effort within your institution. You should be partnered with alumni. You should be partnered with faculty. All of you should be working together in terms of employer relations, and no one should be just holding one relationship, which I think sometimes happens in some of our places. I think secondly, you need funding behind it. There should be an employer relations division within your career services. There should at least be one person, probably more than one, that's their full goal is to just cultivate these relationships, maintain these relationships, and be able to articulate, we talk about that elevator speech in one or two sentences, what I'll say Johnson Wales student brings to their industry. And these employer relations partners, they change all the time. So you can have a great relationship with your chancellor and the president of that company, but it's that college relations person who's coming on your campus or choosing not to come on your campus. So you do need to maintain that relationship, and it has to be strategic because you can't be everywhere.
Right. Hold on, Richard. Marie, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just kind of, I think kind of building on what Marjorie was saying. I think it's important to also look at the different levels of employer engagements. We actually have a publication on our JFF website that outlines 5 levels of employer engagement, and it's kind of geared towards education institutions as the audience. And level 1 being kind of very simpler types of things, like maybe getting employers to weigh in on curriculum, all the way up to kind of the most intensive being an employer-led strategy within an institution or within a broader region. So I think being clear about expectations up front, and also, looking at whether it's the use of a sector strategy or workforce intermediaries or some type of kind of scale mechanism that would get past the kind of one-off strategies.
Richard, last word.
So I'd like to comment on the micro-macro issue. So yes, when I was talking from my micro experience. My instinct is that macro is infinitely better if you can make it happen. And so in, say, the context of Ohio, what is happening is that the work that they're doing is enabling institutions who don't have the resources to deliver internships to do it. So it's enabling the kinds of activity that isn't going to happen at the micro level. And that should be good for the student.
We're going to switch gears and go to questions in about 2 or 3 minutes, but I want to ask the panel one quick question, because Richard mentioned this earlier and I opened with it, and that is the focus on liberal arts. And I'll use Massachusetts just as an example. We had a tremendous focus on the community colleges a few years ago. It really was workforce development. It was focused on just-in-time skills. But half of the community college students transfer to a four-year institution, public or private. No one talked about them. No one talked about the liberal arts. No one talked about the adaptable worker and all of these things. Is there something that we as a higher ed consortium across New England can do to really put a focus on the importance of the liberal arts, kind of the career trajectory over the course of an entire career, not just the first job? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I would just, I have a quick thought. We don't actually have a stance on this, but it's got to be a both and. I think the idea of pitting STEM versus liberal arts is a straw man worth knocking down, and that it's about talking about both of them sort of simultaneously, and explaining that the skill set that comes from any number of career pathways is important. And I think that's really I would love to see us stop butting heads that way.
Yeah, I agree. Anybody else on that?
I think I would just add that the ability for our students to be able to articulate what they learned in the skill set and how that translates into whatever position they're applying for. I think there is that little bit of, the health sciences versus the liberal arts, and how much do you provide for each major. If students are confident in what they're learning and they can articulate it and it transfers to what that employer is looking for, in the end, it won't matter what the major is.
I also think the more awareness that can be built around the career options within liberal arts is important. I was a liberal arts major, and a job that I got through my college career center at a law firm actually informed me that I did not want to go into the legal field. So I think it's however you can build those exposures and experience earlier, the better. So.
Richard? So I think we ought to change undergraduate education altogether, and it should be interdisciplinary. That students coming out of our schools should have absolutely great communication skills, reading and writing skills. They should know history, they should know philosophy, and they should have some ability to think in a variety of settings, some of which may be analytical and data-driven, and they need to work well in teams and all of the things that you said. And I just think that we need to provide an education for the students that has them experiencing the perspective that you get from multiple disciplines and working to bring those different perspectives together in the work that they do as undergraduates. Just one example, as I said earlier, I'm a math professor. I talk to students who go out on co-op, come in, tell me about their experiences. We work with them. One assignment I asked was, what was the most meaningful undergraduate course you ever took? So I expected linear algebra, algebraic topology. What did I get? The most important course I ever took at Northeastern was communication skills.
Well, I second all the comments that were made up here, and I asked the question not just because our Dean of our College of Humanities and Social Sciences is in the audience, but also because it's what I hear from employers, but what I don't hear is the voice of employers on this issue. And actually, maybe it's industry groups. They need to be a little bit louder. Otherwise, we might lose some of what we have in the liberal arts because of a sense of expediency. So that brings us to questions from the audience. Sir, anyone want to react to that?
I would say communication. From my perspective, setting those expectations appropriately for both the student and for that employer or that incubator center, wherever it is. I happen to oversee our entrepreneurship center, and that's a challenging environment for a young undergraduate student. You're really thinking outside of the box, and set guidelines of what is your role as that employer. You're a mentor. You're going to adhere to this description, whatever they provide ahead of time. And then key points by that higher education partner to say, are they meeting that? You can't just let them go and expect in that 14 or whatever, however long it is, that it will happen. People change, just like employment for all of us is challenging, it would be for a student too. So in my perspective, the higher education partner has a responsibility to make sure you said you were going to do all these things, are you doing it? And then also making sure that that student is meeting those expectations too. The answer for me would be storytelling. Use storytelling to whatever success stories you have. You need to start articulating that and use storytelling to do that. Even if it's just a few, to say, look what this company was able to do with these students in this period of time under this program.
So I want to second what Maureen is saying, but in my own experience, I remember talking to employers about getting into co-op, and they would say, well, we can't do that. So I invited them for breakfast with other employers who were successful at taking advantage of student opportunities. And so this person said, potential employer, we're trying to recruit him, said, well, we can't do that. And the other employer said, well, let me tell you how this works for us and how we do it. You can do it. And this is what you're going to get out of it. So my point is the voice of authenticity. So if you want to recruit employers, have them talking to other employers who know how to do this and who can talk about why they do it and what benefits they get. So yes, we're valuable communicators, but if there's a way to get successful employers into the conversation, I would say that would be a good thing.
Yeah, just a couple examples. So I think Year Up, which is a kind of a at-risk youth program that's here in Boston and in 15 other cities, and also I know some community colleges in Kentucky, I'm sure other places too, have instituted what they call kind of money-back guarantees. So if an employer takes on a student either as an intern or a hire, and things don't work out either kind of on the technical side or on the soft skills side, the training provider will kind of take them back and do the upskilling to meet that gap. So I've heard that is, helping in some areas. So I think that's something to look at.
Yeah, just one example, Cisco Systems, CISCO. Their HR department, I went out to see them, they're in Western Mass, but they're worldwide. They basically will vet with the higher ed institution the interns that they get, and they're changing their whole HR structure to only bring in interns because essentially it lowers their risk. It lowers their risk in terms of the hiring mechanism. They know a little bit better what they're getting before they have to actually buy that talent, so to speak. That's what they told me. So another question? We probably have time for one or two more questions. Anyone? Paula? I'm going to give a quick answer and then we'll go to the panel. But in Massachusetts, I think we have a lot of work to do, but we're definitely not there yet. But in southeastern Massachusetts, and really this is the case across Massachusetts, we would not have a talent shortage if we were able to focus on gateway cities and then to have students basically get through the K-12 school system at the same rate as suburban students. Go to college at the same rate, get through college at the same rate. We would not have a talent shortage. We would have a talent surplus. So in southeastern Mass, we are working on that, but really without the kind of state encouragement, with zero state dollars really to encourage that as well. I think we need more leadership along those lines. I think a gateway city focus is one of the ways to get there. The panel, anybody?
I just think it's a great point because at JFF we do work in probably almost every New England state, and I don't think we run across many cross-state initiatives. So I think it's a good point. And the only example I can think of offhand is kind of central Massachusetts in the manufacturing sector, and I know they're kind of consider that region to go down into Connecticut, and they have some kind of joint efforts going on there, but I think it's a big need.
I'm thinking through sort of that regional partnership, and most of the ones that I know are sort of metro area, which involves multiple states. Cincinnati, Philadelphia. In those metro areas can cover a significant amount of land, multiple states. As far as sort of like whole multi-state collaboratives, some of the regional labs are better than others at this. I would say that the Western Interstate, Western Interstate Commission on Higher Ed, that sounds right, has done some really interesting multi-state work, particularly on sharing data, where, if your graduate leaves your state, and in general, you have no idea where they went. And so this is a collaborative that actually lets the states understand within, a multi-state area where their graduates go, what kind of jobs they get, whether they move back. It's a one of a kind right now, but I'm hoping that it spreads a little further.
I would agree with the panelists. I think there is a real gap. I really honestly can't think of one strategic organization that's doing that. But what I would say is that it's coming from employers. So if you're a university and you have size and depth, and you're working with national companies, they will say things to you such as, how many students do you have from Colorado? How many students do you have from Florida? Because I have needs here. And so that's a cross-state initiative that's coming from those top employers, and they're attracted to certain schools because you can provide that diversity because of your enrollment. So I do see a need in terms of, how do we utilize and share each other's resources to meet the needs of employment that's out there, and not have a singular focus, which I think we really do have right now.
About 30 seconds, Richard, to wrap it up.
Right. So I think the question is really relevant because I don't know whether I call it a worst case scenario, Rhode Island has a group of employers that it's working with and institutions that it works with. And so if I'm a student working in Rhode Island, I can have, there's an incentive for employers in Rhode Island to work with you, but there's no incentive for students from Massachusetts. So suppose Massachusetts does the same thing. Now we're in competition. This is not good.
That's right. Maureen, Marjorie, Richard, Maria, thank you for those comments. And just a reminder that we do have a convener that brought us all here today, a best practice, most definitely, in NEBI. And I want to thank the New England Board of Higher Ed for bringing us all together. I want to thank Michael Thomas, who's over there. By the way, when Michael started as president, he didn't have any gray hair. And Carolyn Morwick again. Have a great afternoon. Safe travels, everyone. Thank you, panel.
Thank you.